Hey guys, how are you this evening? It's Dr. Deb. Welcome to tonight's talk on people who are abusers that become victims, people who are victims that become abusers. How is that possible? Why would someone who has suffered so much being a victim want to become an abuser and hurt somebody else? It doesn't make sense until you look into it a little bit more. And then it does make sense. So we're going to cover that, but we're also going to cover more. We're going to find out what the implications for therapy are, because a therapist working with a couple who has had a background of abuse and victimhood needs special handling. And when you see what that special handling is, guess what, guys? You'll never feel the same about abusers and victims. So let's dig in. The first thing you should know why a victim would become a perpetrator is that it feels empowering. Think about it. We all have a mind. We want to share our mind. We have preferences. Do you like chocolate? No, I like vanilla. Listen, I happen to like chocolate, but I have some grandkids who prefer vanilla. How is that possible? I asked them that question, but it's all a joke because we love each other. But yeah, you can prefer vanilla. And if I prefer chocolate, do I have a right to make you eat it? Do I have a right to make you be anything that you're not? Here's an example. A father is a great, great student as a kid. He grows up and he has some kind of a very prestigious job that uses all his brains, and his child is not a good student. What happens to that kid? What is his relationship with his child? Well, he might yell at him, he might torment him, he might mock him, he might not even talk to him. He might have all kinds of bad thoughts about that kid. So the kid is no longer able to be who he is. Who he is may be very smart. He's just not good at memorizing or whatever he had to do at school that wasn't working out. Reading. One of my grandsons wasn't talking till age 3 and was in need desperately in elementary school of a reading teacher. Guess what? He's now a senior in high school, and he was at the top of his class in all his subjects last year. So does that mean he wasn't smart, but he became smart? No. He was always smart enough. He needed help in certain ways. And if a child is not appreciated and valued for those ways that are his ways or her ways, then that's disempowering. Not to be yourself is disempowering. So now you're in an abusive relationship in which you get to be you. And the person who hurt you, who disempowered you, devalued you, dismissed you, mocked you, ignored you, now that person may be in your hands, under your control. There's a big, big problem of elderly abuse in this country. And in some cases, I get it. The abuser was a disempowered child who now feels empowered. It's not good. Abuse is not good. I am not saying it is. But I want you to understand what was taken away from the victim that the victim now got back just by circumstances that they have power. And so sometimes they just can't help. Well, of course, you can always help, but they think they can't help but use that power in a wrong way. So that's point number one. It's empowering. And point number two, it feels good to do payback. It's as if you're evening the scale. Now, here's the thing. This is the truth. You're not. You're not evening the scale of justice. You're not. But you feel like you are. So you have, for example, the battered wife syndrome, where a woman might literally kill the man who was beating her all the time. Now, she does that in self-defense. She's not doing it just to be empowered, but she is evening the score. She's not trying to even the score. That's not her goal. Her goal is her own safety, but she ends up evening the score. And let's talk about safety for a minute. The whole reason that a person is a victim is because they have no choice. The power of the victimizer is too great for them. And that power might be psychological, you know. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily nod toward the gun cabinet, which is another way of threatening I mentioned in a previous one of these podcasts. But yeah, you can threaten physically, but you can also hurt someone emotionally or have that hurt hanging over the head of your victim so that they have to comply with whatever the abuser wants. So when that person has a chance to even the score by paying back, it feels good. I will add that that good feeling is very temporary, very temporary. I have never heard anyone who paid back their abuser say they felt good for more than a minute. Why? Because remember, originally, their self, who they are, their identity, was dismissed, disregarded, overlooked, pushed to the side, whatever, it wasn't able to express itself. So now, if that person who thinks of himself as a very nice person does the payback to even that score, it doesn't feel good after all, because why? That's not who they are. That's not who they perceive themselves to be. So the result of all that is it's not working, but that's what happens on a temporary basis. And sometimes, by the way, a person will revolve. It's kind of like the drinker who drinks to feel better because they feel miserable, and then they feel miserable when they wake up with the hangover. Not only do they feel miserable about the hangover, but they feel miserable about the fact that they gave it to themselves by overdoing the drinking. So what do? They have a drink so they won't feel so bad. See how that goes? Unfortunately. So you can have this happen with abuse too. A person who is a nice person can be very angry at their abuser or someone in their life who seems like or resembles in some way their abuser. And they get mad at them. And then they feel terrible because that's not who they are. And then what do? Well, they have to feel better. That person's not the drinker. that person feels better by getting the power back. So they punch him again, either verbally or physically. It's all the same. In fact, research shows that verbal abuse and emotional abuse hurts more. Every single research piece in which abuse victims either were interviewed or had to fill out some kind of a chart or a questionnaire says that. So there's thousands upon thousands of answers over the last 2 decades. No. 3 decades, I'd say, showing that. That's when the window opened to allow a little light in this area. Okay. So, number 3, it's a reenactment, but you get a different outcome. A person who has been an abuse victim may want to somehow relive the experience only with a better outcome. So if they victimize another person, and they themselves are not the victim, they feel better because in taking themselves back to the original situation, they're not the victim. Someone else is. So in that case, it's not about having power over that other person. It's not even about having an evening of the scale of justice on that person, because that person may be a total bystander of a person that's not even part of their life. But they feel a sense of, I'm repeating it with a good outcome for me, not you. Okay, so that's number 3. And again, understand, this is not healthy thinking. It's just the thinking of people who have been through hell. And they don't know a better way out. Let's go on to number 4. Victimhood can convey entitlement. See, a little kid will pull up his blanket and put his thumb in his mouth, and that will give him or her comfort. So the victim, as victimhood is taking place, needs to comfort themselves. And they learn that they're entitled to it. That's why some victims will drink or use drugs or other things that are very unhealthy for them. But they feel entitled to coddle themselves, to soothe themselves. And they give themselves self-soothing through victimhood. So you can then assume that this victim who no longer is might want to become something else, like a perpetrator, just because they're entitled to get some kind of soothing. Now, why would it soothe them to be a perpetrator? Well, the reasons I've already given, but there are more reasons. It may just be comforting to see someone else hurt and not yourself. I don't know. The mind of a serial killer, for example, seems unfathomable, but when you lay out these possibilities, there's some logic for them. If there weren't, they wouldn't do it. They do it, so there's something there that's motivating them to do it. I always say this, please comment, especially if I'm not making sense. Because the truth is, this is deep stuff. And if I'm not making sense, comment, please. If I am, great, you can comment that too. And if you're seeing this later, comment in the comments section. I love to get those comments. I always catch up on them. If you do make comments, you'll notice I always do catch up and get back to people, even if it's just a thumbs up. Number 5, it is a way to express anger. Let's say, for an example, that an abuser was unable, not allowed to cry or protest because they would be hurt more in some way. Or they might be so afraid of their abuser's reaction, they don't even know what it would be, that they just shut down. So now, the very fact that they could not express themselves makes them very angry, because they were angry at being mistreated in the first place. And that anger stays inside. Guys, it does not go away. There is no such thing, just so you know. If anyone ever says the words to you, get over it, or if you hear it in your own head, get over it, or if you say it to someone else, it makes no sense, because it's not possible. You never get over it. What happens is it goes underground. It gets suppressed. It gets held back. And then when you have an opportunity to show anger, you do. And you feel good. You feel a release because you expressed your anger. So that's number 5. And I mentioned number 6, the battered wife syndrome. The battered wife syndrome really only looks like a victim became a perpetrator. As I was saying before, the person who goes and takes a gun or whatever means and kills her tormentor, who has been beating her to a bloody pulp for years, is doing it in self-defense. In fact, the whole concept of the battered wife syndrome came about in the 80s because women were sent to jail for murder, and a psychologist named Lenore Walker was reasoning, wait a minute, this is not who she is. She didn't want to be a murderer. Now, where the deck was stacked against these people is that in court, the prosecutor would say, well, you waited until he was sleeping, or you waited until his back was turned to shoot him. So obviously you weren't being threatened at that point. So therefore you're guilty. That was the logic in those days. And Walker came along and said, no, the imbalance of power led the woman to rebalance the power by getting rid of her tormentor at a time when she literally could get rid of him. Not because she was a heartless person, but frightened to death, actually, for her own life and her own safety and that of her kids. And it's still going on today. It's not a new story. And Walker has been around the country for 30 years or so. Yeah, 30 years or so, testifying for these people. So I'm not sure I want to include number 6 because it's not really someone who wants to do this. You know, there's a difference between a positive experience, a positive reinforcer, and a negative reinforcer. A negative reinforcer is the case of the battered wife syndrome. You all know what a positive reinforcer is. Here's a negative. You're in a building and the building collapsed, and there's a heavy steel girder with concrete on it pulling you down. And somehow you ease yourself out. It took you 3 days, inch by inch, but you got out. Now you're free. You can claw through the rubble and get to safety. That's a negative reinforcer. It's getting rid of the pain. You feel better, right? In any reinforcer, you feel better, but it's not because you had something positive happen. It's because you got rid of the pain. Okay, so I'm not sure it's on the list, but I put it there just to help you out. Now, even observers can become victims or perpetrators. Who are those observers? Those are the kids. The kids watching their parents fight inevitably, statistically, will grow up to have a higher probability of either being a victim or perpetrator as adults. Much higher statistical probability. And for all the same reasons that I was just going through. Feeling power that they never had as a child, feeling good to pay back, even though they may not be paying back their parents. They're paying back someone who hurt them. That's why you have these random shootings. Why would someone walk into a place of business, a post office, a movie theater, and shoot people? Well, they have all that feeling of needing to balance things out, to pay back, to balance the scale of justice. And in their mind, that's doing it, even though it obviously isn't doing it. I hope you all get the difference between the way they're thinking and feeling and reality. It's not helping, but they don't have choices, or they don't feel like they have choices. They don't have rational choices. So now I want to kind of take a little bit of a side road here. When I have couples coming in to see me with this history of having been abused, so that in one way or another, both are victims, what happens to the marriage? I will tell you, I have never had a client who was an abusive spouse that was not a serious abuse victim. And I have never had a client who was an abused spouse that was not a serious abuse victim. So there are some very specific implications, especially when they're coming in together as a couple. I'm sure you've heard many people complain, maybe you've been there yourselves, about how bad it is to go into couples counseling and you start fighting. You can't help it. Or you start just turning a cold shoulder on one another. You can't help it. And then what happens? Where does the therapy go? That's not good. That's not helpful. And I don't want that in my room. So what does a therapist do? And this is for all of you that need to go to therapy and you're scared that it's going to make things worse. Please attend to these points and interview your therapist. Give them a chance, a short chance, and make sure they're doing it right for your benefit. Number one, they cannot take sides. If they take sides, then one person feels unheard. And guess what? Even if somebody is a vicious abuser of the other person, they were abused too, and they need to heal from their own history, their own past, and therefore the therapist has to be there for them. And not only be there for them as a therapist in the role. No, the therapist is a human being. The therapist has to feel for them, compassion for them, for all they've been through. So the therapist may feel tremendous empathy for the victim in the marriage, but just as much so for the perpetrator, for this reason. Number two, Oh, I just said it. In my heart, I feel total compassion for each person. So not only are you neutral in the sense of taking sides, but you feel compassion. I also want to say something. That does not mean, oh, here we are. I listed it in my list as number 3. That does not mean that you don't call out behavior that's hurtful from anyone, whether the victim has become a perpetrator or the perpetrator is still a perpetrator, or it's all in the past for both of them, but they're thinking about it day and night. You call out what hurts the other person. I have a rule. I don't want pain in my room. There's enough pain in the world outside. God only knows. I don't want it in my room. So people cannot hurt each other. And if they do, I call it out. The person who was dishing out pain has to be accountable. That hurt. And I go very, very, very slowly so that as we talk, we only deal with one sentence at a time. Because if we start piling up stories that get too long and too convoluted, we'll get lost in the bushes somewhere. And God knows how much hurt can come just from that. So that's number 3. Number 4, I don't let, if I can call it out, the victim turn into an abuser. A victim may be very hurt. They can start screaming and pointing a finger and saying all kinds of nasty things. Not in my room. Now, will people go home and do all these bad things to each other? Unfortunately, I can't control that. I can't go home with them. I generally try to remember to tell people don't talk about these things between visits, but usually that goes to the wayside. Can't be helped. But at least while we're working together, they get a taste of freedom and safety in my room, and they also get a taste of restrictions and boundaries of what's not good and not healthy for themselves. Remember, if this doesn't feel like them, if they're not a mean person in their own eyes, then how can they act mean all over again to their partner? It's not real for them. So that's hurting them as much as it is hurting their partner. And finally, I'm not going to expect either one to have compassion for the other person yet. And that's a hard one for my clients. I have to say, you all out there may find it hard too, because it takes time when each person is raw and bleeding, like bandage them up. They're hemorrhaging. They're going to die here on the table. Not really, but emotionally. They have to heal first. However, that said, when they hear each other's truth, when they hear each other's story of their own pain, sometimes they can feel compassion. However, it's not going to happen when one of them caused that pain. The one who caused the pain is not going to be ready to accept the responsibility and feel the compassion yet. It will take time. That's just part of it. Number 6, it is normal that they are going to trigger each other because they were never in self-energy from their time of childhood in their family of origin growing up to be able to handle the kinds of people and the things other people would say that might be hurtful. In therapy, people become more sensitized This is not bad. It is good. We should be more sensitive to each other. We should be more sensitive in general to the world. So it starts with ourselves. If we were hurt and we push that out of conscious awareness so that we're safe and we feel better and we're not in pain, okay, that makes sense. In therapy, we're going to start remembering stuff and it's going to hurt. It can't be helped. It is a good thing. You know, there was a person who was a great psychiatrist in the world of addictions, Abraham Tversky. And I once heard him speak decades ago. And he said addicts, because he was in the world of addictions, are different from the rest of us in the following way. They never could take pain. They were too sensitive. So they drank to blot out pain. Now when they're in recovery, they're feeling more pain than they think they can handle because they're not used to it. Whereas the rest of us who may not have had trauma in our lives or who had therapy or who managed the trauma somehow in spite of having it, the rest of us, I don't want to say tolerate pain, but they kind of know, okay, this really, really, really hurts, and I know it's going to hurt, and that's life. Like if someone you really love dies, it hurts, and you deal with it by just getting up in the morning and going about your day and being sad and knowing you're sad and crying if you cry. And that's normal. It's healthy. Feeling is normal and healthy. Therefore, feeling pain is normal and healthy, especially when you have indeed been a victim. You should feel sad for yourself. You deserve it. It doesn't mean you should wallow in it, but if you are wallowing in it, that's normal too. You're allowed. So when you're that sensitive, you're going to be triggered more readily. Little things will hurt. That is normal. So what do you do about it? What is my job to do about it as therapist? I help each person tap into their own self energy. And if you've never heard me speak and you don't know what I'm talking about, please go back to the beginning of my podcasts, go to my podcast list and just listen to all of them because you'll understand. But self energy is who you really are. Your characteristics of self that are wise and kind and good. Whereas the way you handle things, your defense mechanisms, we just call those parts of you. They're not the real you. There's something you needed to create to survive in a tough situation, and you did. So that is how I help people deal with triggers. The more self-energy you have, it's not like you don't feel it, but you recognize where it's coming from. Someone said this to me today, and I was very excited. She said that when her husband says X, Y, and Z that used to throw her, she now recognizes, oh, that's his issues. Those are his parts. I don't have to take it personally. Yay for her. That's great. And that's what I try to do with everyone who's coming to me, to help them feel their self-energy. I must, number 7, validate both people's experiences. And that's what I mean by being not taking sides. They both feel what they feel, whatever it is. They're entitled to their feelings. Each person is entitled to their feelings. And so I validate it, yet I will, as I said a few minutes ago, call out behavior that hurts the other person. So let me just say, therefore, number 8, generally speaking, I need to separate people when they first come to me. We'll have one visit together so I get to know who they are, but very often I can't see them together because they're keeping on hurting each other. They don't want to, they don't mean to, that's not their goal, but that's what happens. So I separate them until we've worked together on noticing what self-energy feels like inside yourself and feeling good from it, feeling happy, and then taking that into the session so that even when you become triggered, you can call out the self-energy again. And now, well, I did say this before. I'm reading my own notes here for today. I always make extensive notes so that you guys get a rich podcast full of good stuff. Number 9, joint sessions do not ever cover a whole arguments. We just take a little bit, because what's important is not what happened, but how you took it, what it meant to you. Because this way we get to know who your defenses, protectors, parts, whatever word you want to use, are, and you yourself can start to soothe and care for these parts of you. In other words, it's not a one-way street where they're making you do some behavior. You respond to them back and soothe them because they're all young. They came into your life when you were younger. So what is the overall goal then of therapy like that? And I see I've gone over, and I apologize. Anybody who needs to get off, you can pick this up later on the replay, but let me finish this up because I think it's important. The goal of all this is for two people to be able to have self-to-self conversations without the protectors that turned you into an abuser or a victim, but your true self. That means being able to express your true feelings, not suppressing them, from a place of recognizing that feelings you have are not all of who you are. They're parts of who you are. But you can express all of that, your true self and your protective parts, to your person that you're with. 2, hearing the other, but not losing yourself, which is tough, because that means that you are actively listening to the voices in your head of your protectors, the one that says, watch out, the one that says, don't do this, the one that says, they don't mean that. You're actively listening to those protectors, while at the same time taking leadership to say back to them, what you're saying I don't agree with, what you're saying I do, thank you for letting me know. Well, as I said before, hearing the person that you're talking to. It's complicated, it's not easy, but it's doable. Everyone who gets through working with me does do it, so it works. And this has been going on for 30 years because that's what IFS is. Validating and supporting the other person, even when you're angry. Because if they did something right, and that's true, why not say it? Appreciating more than not. Let's say 85 to 90% of your heart is appreciating who the other one is. And the other 15% may be annoyed with some aspects of them. That's normal. Each person having an equal chance to be heard. Each person walking away feeling understood and seen. And finally, because of that, building trust. This does not mean that your partner agrees with you. They really may prefer vanilla and you really may prefer chocolate. But they understand how much you like the vanilla. And that's the point. They get that. And that can only happen when each person has indeed healed, which means more and more self-energy replaces the broken and wounded parts. And then is time for an apology. I've kept you all way over, so if you all have anything to say, any comments, let me know. Chat in quick, and I'll say goodnight.